Welcome back to Revenge Water Official. If you are enjoying the content and want to support the journey, then make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support helps Revenge Water Official grow and bring you even better videos every single day, so join the family today by clicking subscribe, and thank you for being part of the team. Imagine walking into what you thought was a simple family dinner only to realize every single person you love has been plotting against you for months. My name is Chloe, and I always thought my mom was my best friend until the day my grandfather passed away and left me everything. Now my entire family is sitting in a circle staring at me like I am a criminal because I refuse to sign away my future. Stay tuned because you will not believe the lengths my own mother went to just to trick me into giving up my inheritance, and how a single phone call changed my life forever. You need to watch until the very end to see how the betrayal unfolded in a way I never expected. The rain was pouring down against the windows of my small apartment in Seattle, and the sound felt like a warning that I was too naive to understand at the time. My name is Chloe, and for 23 years I believed that family was the only thing that truly mattered in this world. I grew up with a mother named Sarah who was the life of every party. She was beautiful and charming, but she always had a way of making everything about her. Even when I was a little girl, I remember her spending money we didn't have on designer shoes while I wore hand-me-downs from the neighbors, but I loved her anyway because she was my mom, and I thought that was just how life worked. Then there was my younger brother Leo, who was always the golden child in her eyes. No matter how many times he got kicked out of school or lost a job, she would find an excuse for him. The only stable person in my entire life was my grandfather Jack. He was my father's father, and he was a man of steel and silence who had built a massive construction empire from nothing. He saw something in me that he didn't see in his own daughter or grandson. He saw a worker. He saw someone who valued the legacy he had built. He used to take me to his sites and show me how the foundations were poured, and he would tell me that a building is only as strong as the ground it sits on. Chloe, and people are the same way. I didn't know then that he was preparing me for a storm that would tear my world apart. Last year Grandpa Jack passed away in his sleep, and the world seemed to go quiet for a while. I was devastated because he was my mentor and my protector, but the grief was quickly replaced by a cold reality. When the will was read, we all sat in that lawyer office with the smell of old paper and expensive cologne in the air. My mother was already talking about the cruise she wanted to take, and Leo was looking at pictures of sports cars on his phone. They were so sure that the money was theirs because they were the direct bloodline, but when the lawyer cleared his throat and started reading, the room went ice cold. Grandpa Jack had left a small yearly allowance to my mother and a one-time payment to Leo, but the entirety of his estate, the business, the properties, the $7 million trust fund, and the family home in the mountains was left entirely to me. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I could see the veins popping out on my mother's neck as she turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw pure hatred in her eyes. She didn't see her daughter anymore. She saw a barrier between her and the lifestyle she felt she deserved. Leo started screaming right there in the office, calling me a thief and saying I must have manipulated the old man in his final days. I was too shocked to even defend myself because I had no idea this was coming. The lawyer told them to leave, but the damage was done. Over the next few weeks the harassment started slowly. First it was phone calls from my mom crying about how she couldn't afford her mortgage and how I was being cruel for holding on to money I didn't need. Then it was my aunt and uncle calling me from different states telling me that I was destroying the family peace. I tried to explain that the money was locked in a legal trust for my education and to keep the business running, but they didn't care about facts, they only cared about the cash. Then suddenly the tone changed. My mother stopped calling to yell and started calling to apologize. She told me she was sorry for her behavior and that she realized she was just grieving her father. She said she wanted us to be a family again, and she invited me over for a special Sunday dinner to celebrate my birthday, which was coming up. I wanted so badly to believe her because I felt so alone. I missed having a mother, and I missed the feeling of belonging somewhere. She promised me that there would be no talk of money and no lawyers, just a home-cooked meal and some quality time. I agreed to go, but as I pulled up to her house that evening I noticed there were several cars in the driveway that I didn't recognize. My heart started to race, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I walked up to the porch and took a deep breath before knocking on the door. My mother opened it with a huge fake smile and pulled me into a hug that felt more like a trap than an embrace. She led me into the living room and my heart sank when I saw the entire extended family sitting there in a circle like a jury waiting for a trial. There was my brother Leo, my Aunt Martha, my Uncle Bob, and even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The dining table wasn't set for food, it was covered in folders and legal documents. I turned to my mother and asked her what was going on, and her face changed from the loving mother mask to a cold businesslike stare. She told me that we were having a family meeting because they had all decided that I was being irresponsible with the family legacy. She said they had consulted a lawyer of their own and that if I didn't sign a document turning over management of the trust to her, they would take me to court and drag my name through the mud. She told me that they had already prepared the papers and all I had to do was sign and then we could have our dinner and be a happy family again. I looked at Leo and he was smirking at me, holding his phone up as if he was recording the whole thing. I realized then that the dinner was a lie and the apology was a lie. I was in a room full of people who were supposed to love me, but they were acting like a pack of wolves. I told them I wasn't signing anything and that Grandpa Jack had made his choice for a reason. My mother stepped closer to me, and her voice was a whisper that sent chills down my spine. She said, "Chloe, you are not leaving this house until you sign those papers. We have all night, and we are not going to let you ruin this for everyone else." I looked at the door and saw that my Uncle Bob was standing right in front of it, blocking my exit. I was trapped in my own mother's house and the nightmare was only just beginning. The room felt like it was getting smaller and smaller as the air became thick with the smell of my mother's perfume and the desperation of my relatives. My Uncle Bob stood like a stone wall in front of the door, and I realized that this wasn't just a meeting, it was an ambush. My mother Sarah walked over to the table and picked up a heavy fountain pen, holding it out to me like a weapon. She told me that I was being a difficult child and that she had raised me better than to be this greedy. She started talking about how she had changed my diapers and worked 3 jobs to keep me fed, which I knew was a lie because Grandpa Jack had always sent her monthly checks, but I was too scared to call her out in front of everyone. Leo, my brother, started pacing around me like a predator, saying that I was always the favorite and that it was time for me to give back what I had stolen from him. I told them that I didn't steal anything and that Grandpa Jack knew exactly what he was doing, but my Aunt Martha laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the wall. She said that an old man in his 80s couldn't possibly know what he was doing, and that I must have bewitched him or lied to him about the rest of the family. They started taking turns sitting me down in a chair in the center of the room and shouting their grievances at me one by one. It was like a psychological torture session designed to make me feel like the smallest person in the world. My uncle told me that if I didn't sign, I would be responsible for him losing his house because he had counted on his share of the inheritance to pay off his debts. My cousin, who I barely knew, started crying, saying she needed the money for her kids' medical bills, which I knew was another lie because she didn't even have kids. I felt my resolve weakening, not because I wanted to give them the money, but because the emotional pressure was becoming unbearable. I looked at my mother and asked her if she really hated me this much, and she didn't even blink. She just said that she loved the family more than she loved my stubbornness. She told me that if I signed the paper, she would make sure I was taken care of and that we could go back to being a normal family. But I knew the truth. Once I signed those papers, I would be discarded like a piece of trash. They just needed my signature to unlock the vaults. My brother snatched my purse away when I tried to reach for my phone, and he told me that I didn't need to talk to anyone else because this was a private family matter. I felt a surge of panic and my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to stand up, but my Uncle Bob put a hand on my shoulder and pushed me back down, telling me to stay put until I did the right thing. The hours started to bleed together and the sun went down, leaving the room lit by a single harsh overhead lamp that made everyone look like shadows. I started to feel dizzy from the lack of food and the constant screaming. They were telling me I was a monster and a traitor, and that Grandpa Jack would be ashamed of me for causing this much pain to my own flesh and blood. My mother then brought out a folder of photos from when I was a baby and started showing them to me, telling me that she could forgive everything if I just cooperated. She was playing with my mind, trying to use my memories against me. I realized then that she had been planning this for months. Ever since the funeral, she had researched how to break someone down mentally, and she was using every trick in the book. I looked at the legal document on the table and saw that it wasn't just a management agreement, it was a full transfer of assets that would leave me with nothing but a tiny monthly allowance that she would control. I would basically be her servant for the rest of my life. I told her that I would rather die than sign that paper, and her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She slapped me across the face so hard that my vision went blurry for a second, and the room went silent. Even my brother looked a bit shocked, but my mother didn't apologize. She just leaned in close and whispered that I was a pathetic little girl who didn't deserve the name of this family. She said she would keep me in that house for days if she had to, and that no one was coming to save me because she had told everyone I was going on a long vacation. To clear my head, I realized I had to be smarter than them if I wanted to get out. I stopped arguing and put my head in my hands, pretending to cry and break down. I told them that I was exhausted and that I just needed a few minutes alone in the bathroom to think about it and wash my face. They whispered among themselves for a minute before my mother agreed, but she told Leo to stand outside the bathroom door so I wouldn't try anything funny. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. Leaning against the sink and trying to breathe, I looked at the small window, but it was too high and too narrow for me to squeeze through. Then I remembered that I had my old iPad in the cabinet from when I used to stay over during college. I prayed it still had a charge. I dug through the towels and found it, and when the screen lit up with 5% battery, I felt a glimmer of hope. I knew the Wi-Fi password because it hadn't changed in years, and I quickly connected to the internet. I didn't call the police first because I knew my mother would hear me talking through the door. Instead, I messaged my best friend's brother Mark, who was a deputy sheriff in the next county. I sent him my location and a short message saying that my family was holding me hostage and trying to force me to sign documents, and that they had taken my phone. I told him to come fast and not to use sirens until he was close because I was afraid of what they might do if they got spooked. I watched the little spinning icon on the screen as the message sent, and then the iPad died and went black. I hid it back under the towels and splashed cold water on my face, trying to look like I had been defeated. I walked back out into the living room and saw them all sitting there with expectant looks on their faces. My mother had the pen ready, and she was smiling that horrible thin smile again. I sat down at the table and reached for the pen, and I could see the greed in their eyes as they leaned forward. I started to write my name very slowly, making the letters shaky and stalling for every second I could. I asked them questions about the legal terms, pretending to be confused just to keep them talking. I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway and my heart jumped, but I kept my eyes on the paper. My mother heard it too and told Leo to go check who it was. I knew this was my only chance. I dropped the pen and stood up, shouting as loud as I could that I was being held against my will. The front door was kicked open before Leo could even reach it, and the room was suddenly filled with light and the sound of voices. I had never been so happy to see a uniform in my life, but the look on my mother's face told me that this was far from over, and she was already thinking of a new lie to tell the officers. The living room exploded into chaos as the officers stepped inside, and my mother immediately changed her face into a mask of concerned grief. She ran toward Mark and the other officer, crying that I had suffered a mental breakdown and that they were just trying to keep me safe from hurting myself. She told them that I had been acting delusional since the funeral, and that the stress of the inheritance had broken my mind. I stood there shaking with my hands balled into fists, and I told the officers to look at the table. I told them to look at the legal documents and the fact that my brother was still holding my phone in his hand. Mark looked at Leo and ordered him to hand over my property, and he looked at the papers on the table, which were clearly not medical documents but a total transfer of wealth. The officers told everyone to sit down and keep their hands visible while they sorted out the situation. My mother kept talking, her voice getting higher and more desperate as she realized her plan was falling apart. She started blaming my Uncle Bob, saying it was his idea, and then my uncle started shouting at her, saying she was the one who had called the meeting. I stood behind the officers, feeling the first wave of safety I had felt in hours, and I told Mark that I wanted to press charges for unlawful imprisonment and assault because my face was still stinging from where she had slapped me. The room went silent again when I said that because they never thought I would actually involve the law against my own blood, but I realized that they had stopped being my family the moment they decided to hunt me like prey. The officers escorted me out of the house, and I spent the night at a secure location because I knew they would try to find me the next morning. I went straight to Grandpa Jack's primary lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrison, who had been Grandpa's best friend for 40 years. He looked at my bruised face and heard my story, and he didn't look surprised at all. He reached into his desk and pulled out a black sealed envelope that had my name on it in Grandpa's handwriting. He told me that Grandpa Jack knew his daughter and grandson better than anyone, and he had prepared for this exact moment. He told me that there was a video file on a thumb drive inside the envelope, and we plugged it into the computer in the office. The screen flickered to life, and there was Grandpa Jack sitting in his favorite leather chair, looking tired, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He said, "Chloe, if you are watching this, it means our family has failed the ultimate test of character." He said he had left a poison pill in the will that I was only allowed to trigger if they attempted to coerce or harm me. He explained that he had set aside small trust funds for my mother and Leo that would have given them a comfortable life if they had just accepted my leadership, but if they ever tried to take the main estate by force or legal trickery, those funds would be immediately dissolved and donated to a local orphanage. The video showed him signing a secondary document that made this rule ironclad, and he looked into the camera and said, "Chloe, do not feel a single ounce of guilt for what happens next because they chose money over you, and now they will have neither." I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders as I realized that Grandpa Jack had been protecting me from the grave. Mr. Harrison sent out the legal notices that afternoon, and the reaction was explosive. My mother lost her house and her monthly allowance within 30 days, and Leo had to sell his expensive clothes and gadgets just to pay for a tiny studio apartment. They tried to sue me, of course, but the video evidence and the testimony from the police officers made their case impossible to win. Every single person who was in that room that night was barred from the family estate forever. I decided to sell the big family house because it held too many bad memories, and I moved to a beautiful city where no one knew my name or my bank account. I used the money to start a construction firm that focused on building affordable housing for single mothers and victims of domestic abuse, because I wanted to turn my trauma into a foundation for others. I still get emails from my mother sometimes where she alternates between begging for money and telling me how much she hates me. But I have learned the most important lesson of all, which is that family isn't about who you share a DNA with, it is about who stands by you when the world gets dark. I am now a successful woman with a life full of real friends and a partner who loves me for who I am and not what I have. I often go to the park and sit on a bench and think about Grandpa Jack, and I know he would be proud of the building I have become. I am strong and I am independent and I am finally free from the shadows of my past, and I will never let anyone trick me into being small ever again. The rain in Seattle doesn't feel cold anymore, it feels like a fresh start, and I am finally living the life I was meant to live without the weight of their greed holding me back.